Donna Savigny, Board of Ed member.
Emily Tedeschi, student representative on the board.
John O'Neill, Assistant Superintendent of Operations.
Nick Shockney, Assistant Superintendent of Instruction.
Steve Whistler, incoming board member.
Chris West, your new state senator from northeastern Carroll County.
Senator Justin Reedy for District 5, which is the rest of Carroll County.
Chris Tomlinson, delegate-elect for District 5.
Eric Boucher, outgoing commissioner, delegate-elect.
Josh Stanko, delegate-elect in District 42C.
Haven Shoemaker, delegate for District 5 for the next month.
Susan Krebs, delegate for District 5 for the next month.
April Rose, delegate from District 5.
Ed Rothstein, President, Board of County Commissioners.
And Pat Dorsey, board member.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us and for this opportunity to convene to discuss some information related to the blueprint legislation and how it impacts us as a local school system, but also how it impacts us as a county as a whole. First of all, congratulations to each of you on the recent election, and for those of you who may be moving on to new roles or even a new phase of life beyond elected office, best wishes in these new endeavors as well. I believe it may have been Delegate Krebs and Board Member Savigny who originated the idea of having a joint session to better understand the funding under the blueprint and what it means for our school system. I think that the idea is timely and appropriate as I prepare my first budget as superintendent to submit to the Board of Ed. One of our frustrations with the blueprint has been the rate at which the state has been able to provide us some clear guidance. But for those of you who have been on the Board of Ed or in a commissioner role, you'll recall a primary concern we voiced last year was what approach the state would take in placing restrictions on the funding formula under the blueprint. This question of the restricted nature of the funding has been answered. And the clear answer is that the funding, both state and local shares, is very restricted. It is restricted in a way that education funding previously has not been, and that will have impacts for how our schools operate and the conversations we will need to have locally with our commissioners during the upcoming and future budget cycles. We ourselves are still in the first year of trying to fully understand what the budget requires, what the blueprint requires, and what the impact will be. But we are far enough into our thinking and analysis that we understand better now than a year ago that those impacts are likely to be significant once fully implemented. And in the upcoming fiscal year 24, we have to begin to make decisions that will bring about those changes. So for tonight, what we hope we may do is present an overall of funding under the blueprint, which will include how it works in general, what it means for CCPS and how it affects us relative to the rest of the state, and how it is restricted in nature and what the consequences are of those restrictions. Present some models that we've been working on in an attempt to illustrate the potential impact that the restrictions in funding will have on how our schools operate. In particular, what may be the impact on staffing across our schools unless there are offsetting local funds to lessen that impact. And so what we're talking about here is the impact on class sizes. We have a presentation that we hope will accomplish these objectives. The presentation explains the parts of the funding formula under Blueprint, discuss how Carroll compares in the parts of the formula that are ranked, and what the restrictions on the funding mean. As part of the presentation, we have a model that attempts to show an example of how the state believes we should be budgeting under the blueprint and the types of impact they may have on our schools. With that in mind, I would propose that we have Mr. O'Neill deliver the presentation and then have discussions and questions. While the presentation is detailed, it does build on itself, and it may be best to see it through and then have discussion. There should still be well over an hour for questions and discussion if we take this approach. Of course, if anyone is confused on a slide, you can stop us at that point and ask a clarifying question. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. O'Neill.
Thank you, and good afternoon to everyone. And I promise I won't spend a ton of time on each of these slides, so hopefully we can get to the
We'll hold you to that.
important parts more quickly. The blueprint is a lot about policy, and when the Kerwin Commission met, there was so much talk about the policy aspects of what the state wanted to do with public education, and the funding piece followed the Kerwin Commission's report that sort of outlined educational policy for the next decade. But we are now in this current fiscal year operating under the new funding formula, the blueprint formula, and so we have actual numbers, and we could spend some time there using those actuals to sort of understand it, and then get to kind of what for us is turning out to be the key point, the restrictions on that funding, a little bit nearer the end of the slide. But the blueprint sets a new funding formula on a 10-year timeline, sort of like the Bridge to Excellence or Thornton funding formula was set. Some things are very similar. There's parts of the formula that are the same. They've always existed, but perhaps they're modified a little bit in the amounts of funding or how funding flows. And then there are some new areas under the blueprint formula that didn't exist under the Thornton formula. So we'll talk about that a little bit as well. But the big difference is that the funding's restricted, and under the Thornton formula, the funding wasn't restricted. So there was a formula, and you got money in columns on a spreadsheet or buckets or however you want to look at it, but it added up to a total, and then the local boards of ed had the discretion to set their own priorities and spend that money to operate the schools in the school system in the best way that they saw fit. There's some differences here with the blueprint formula in that the money is restricted in all of the program areas or all of the buckets or all of the columns on the spreadsheet, and this slide and the next slide, and I know you have it all in front of you. This constitutes the blueprint formula and shows state aid to every school system in fiscal year 23. I've highlighted Carroll in yellow to try to help sort it out. But we are going to be required to spend all of the money within the program areas or within the columns of the spreadsheet that is designated for, and I'm going to go back, and we're going to be accountable to spending at least 75% of the money in each of the program areas within that program. And we're going to be accountable ultimately for spending that at least 75% of the money at the school level. And that sort of flows by thinking of the student populations in each school, what students are in those schools, what subgroup of students they represent. That's how they're viewing this, and that's where we're going to kind of, to end this, hopefully end this conversation or have the meat of it. Another thing is that's very, very different than the Thornton formula is that we also become, boards of ed, local boards of ed also become an agency that provides funding we now receive from the state to other agencies in the county. And that's unique to me in my whole career, not just under the Thornton formula. We'll talk about those two examples, but for students who are in dual enrollment courses at the college, we are this year, and for the future, we provide funding we now receive as a Board of Ed to the community college. That's the institution with which we have a dual enrollment agreement. And beginning next year, for at least a few years, we have to provide money that we'll receive through the formula to the local workforce development board to focus in on a career counseling requirement of the blueprint. We'll touch. You see the formula before. It's sort of how the state would view adequacy of funding for all 24 school systems. All school systems get a targeted per pupil amount based on the total number of students you have. Without yet getting into what kind of students they are or backgrounds of students, just you get a targeted per pupil amount, and that's sort of the base of the formula. Now the whole formula is wealth equalized, and we'll talk about that as well. So it adjusts depending on how the state ranks the county's relative wealth next to the other 23 jurisdictions. So it's not equitable adequacy, but it's the baseline of funding. Another thing just to note, the new blueprint formula, if you're looking at it by chance, has a new funding program or category called, it probably shows up as CWI, stands for Comparative Wage Index. It's column 4. That replaces something that was called GCEI, or the Geographic Cost for Education Index, which shows up on the formula as column 7 under regional cost differences. That's what we've historically called GCEI. Carroll has been a county that has received GCEI. Carroll is a county that will not receive comparative wage index. So GCEI goes away after this year. We are receiving that $2.6 million this year. Starting next year, we will not receive money under the comparative wage index, so that sort of washes out for us under the formula, and that's a bit of a hit. But at the foundation level, or at how I believe the state considers adequacy of the formula, we're right at the state average. So all of the charts that you see in the presentation that look like this, I clipped from the Department of Legislative Services overview of Maryland local government. So these aren't ours, these aren't mine, these are sourced back to DLS. So at the foundation level, even with wealth equalization in place, we're just, what would that be, $4 off of the state average. So kind of right at the state average, which I think reasonably many people might expect our county to be, or a county like ours to be. And so I would say that's probably generally an okay thing or a good thing if you think about it that way. But as you move into other parts of the formula and get into certain aspects of it, we don't do as well. And that has to do sometimes with our demographics, sometimes with our relative wealth. The formula has 3 parts to it that address targeted student populations. These are not new to the blueprint. They existed under Thornton. They are funded a little bit differently under the blueprint at a higher level. So they're not brand new areas, they're adjusted areas, and they address students who are identified as receiving special education services, students who are identified as receiving English language learning services, and compensatory ed, which for the state means students who are identified as students eligible for free and reduced meals. So they've always called it compensatory ed as long as I've known. I don't know why they call it that. It has nothing to do with compensatory services under special ed, which are near and dear to Mr. Shockney's heart. That's the number of farms kids that you have. And so when you get into some other parts of the formula, like the targeted student populations, we don't do so well at all. We rank dead last when you put it on a per pupil basis in the count of the 24 counties. And this largely has to do with our demographics. What's on the screen right here on this slide is the whole dollar amounts that we're receiving. So this is just state aid for each of those 3 areas, and then a total. But how they get there is they sort of have an index, and then they rank it based on relative wealth. And so, just really quickly, we are last in farm students, which, depending on how you're thinking about this, that could be a bad thing if the goal is to get more money from the state, but a good thing if doing well in relative wealth is important, or being a prosperous county. What that means is we have less, on a percentage basis, we have less farm students than any other county in Maryland. It's been that way for as long as I've worked here, and this is now year 13, I think. And it's probably been that way longer than that, and I don't see that changing over time. We're not last, but we're close to last in the percentage of our students who are English language learners. And we're actually relatively ranked high in students who, as a percentage of students who receive special ed services, but when the state builds the index, we're 24th out of 24. That means less funding than the other counties. That's how you get to the lowest per pupil average, or per pupil amount in the state. This is just sort of more about the index. The overall index is those 3, the targeted student index is those 3 groups combined. The middle index is how they get to ranking wealth. And so we rank 10th in relative wealth for fiscal year 23. We have either ranked 9th or 10th in relative wealth of the 24 jurisdictions in all the years that I've worked here, and I suspect long before as well. So that's pretty consistent with where we have always been. And when they add it all up together, that's how you get to last in the state on a per pupil basis. So when you get past the foundation and get into some of what some of the educational program areas that the blueprint is designed philosophically to get at, that the Kerwin Commission focused on, we fall behind the state because our demographics, our wealth don't line up with counties that would receive more funding. Moving on past the targeted student population parts of the formula. There are some parts of the blueprint formula that are brand new, that did not exist under the Thornton formula, which had been in place since 2002. And so there's a few blueprint areas that are brand new. Many of these are equity-based programs. Almost all of them are poverty-based programs. We don't qualify for any of those at all, and so you'll see zeros, or you saw zeros earlier on the formula chart. And it seems unlikely to me that for some of those programs in our careers, for most of us, we would ever qualify for any funding in some of those program areas. These new areas would also include CCR, which stands for College and Career Ready, so a shift in how Mrs. McCabe and the system need to begin to deliver educational pathways to students, even in middle school, but especially at ninth grade and on. And then it deals with blueprint requirements on teacher compensation, especially relative to developing and implementing a career ladder. And we're not going to get too much into the career ladder tonight, which is a lot about policy, but comes with a cost. But that too is a big part of the blueprint. And so for these targeted areas, in part because we simply don't qualify, so you see zeros. But as far as these blueprint-specific or new areas under the blueprint, we again rank last in the state, about $470-some below the state average. So, I guess the overall point here being, beyond the foundation, we don't do as well under the formula, and then all of this, even the foundation, is wealth equalized, which puts pressure back at the local level, and we rank 10th in relative wealth, and so they adjust everything for that. Want to try to, I'm going to...
John, can I just ask
Yeah,
a
sure.
clarifying question there? Because we rank 10th in relative wealth, but we're dead last in terms of the funding from an equalization perspective. Like, how do they justify that? Like, clearly there's a missing component, right? Like, other counties have more of a barbell type of, they've got the haves and the have-nots. Like, there's kind of like a barbell of relative wealth, whereas we're kind of clumped in the middle. And so that means, like, so they've got the high end to help with the low end, but we've got everybody clumped in the middle and we get nothing. It seems like there's a real disconnect there, and I'm trying to understand how the state justifies that. Like, that seems to be a glaring issue coming out of this.
I was just about to say, I'm going to skip these slides on relative wealth or how they measure wealth, because I think many of you are very, very familiar with it anyway. And I had promised Ms. McCabe I would try to get through this as quickly as possible so you could talk.
Sorry, my bad.
And I've also said to Mrs. McCabe many times leading up to today, I'm a tad bit nervous because I feel like in this moment I'm the state. And at some point I'm going to have to speak for them and voice their view of the world, and I'm going to do that now. And I'll say this: they believe this. They believe the report they drafted. They believe the law they turned that into. They believe the formula that funds it. They believe that wealthy counties can handle the wealth equalization aspects of it. They believe that schools in more affluent communities than schools in less affluent communities can function effectively and well with fewer resources. So, and I'm not trying to put words into any specific person's mouth, but I believe that they believe that if at the end of the day class size is a factor, and I think at some point class size is going to be a factor for us, and we'll talk a little bit about the exact timing of all of this hopefully by the end. But I think that they believe that if you have to make local adjustments to have higher class sizes in certain schools in your county in order to provide the services that they're saying need to be provided to schools that have a higher population of certain targeted students, that's fine, or you have the local option to do different things to increase local funding. And I know all of this can get very touchy, and I'm not trying to...
No, that's exactly what it is.
And I've heard this for many years. For some of you who've been in office for a while, I've been in offices with you where you hear that, at least I've heard that very, very directly. Like, I don't want to go too far afield here, but you make your tax decisions in Carroll County, and we don't tell you we don't call you and tell you you should have done that or do something differently. Those are choices that you can make and do make, and that's not our business. But this is our state formula, and this is how we believe schools are going to be, well, it's not how they believe now, this is how schools are going to be funded for the next 2 years. And those are choices that you get to make. And that might even show up in a minute on the state and local share part of the discussion as to what they mean. I'd also say there's things missing in their thinking.
I
But
guess
I-
that's
but
where
yeah.
I was going with it, because like if we rank 10th in relative wealth, but dead last in terms of the wealth equalization, like there's a disconnect there and some things that they're
No.
not thinking about.
Well, not so much dead last in the wealth equalization, because they apply the wealth equalization to every column on that spreadsheet. So even the foundation is wealth equalized. Even the $10,000 that we give to every teacher who achieves national board certification is wealth equalized. So we're going to give, of the $10,000 that an NBC teacher gets, we'll pay $6,000 of that $10,000, and the state will pay $4,000. So at the foundation level, we actually do okay. I mean, we're at the average, even with it being wealth equalized. But when you get into the areas of the formula where, we are not a diverse county. We're the third least diverse county in the state in many ways. And in the targeted populations, that shows up everywhere except special ed. And so we're hurt under the formula there. When you get to some of the new areas under the blueprint, like, I guess I'd have to go all the way back to, here.
Did you say we're the third least diverse?
The third least diverse county in many measures of diversity. So for instance, race and ethnicity.
Now you're speaking for diversity, so this is great. You're
Garrett-
saying, now you get to speak with.
Garrett and Allegheny would be less diverse than us and than
Yeah.
us. Farms, we're the least, maybe diverse isn't the best word, but we have the smallest percentage of farms students in the state, the whole state, and that hurts you not only on.
English as English as a second language.
You saw now it's ELL, we're
Sorry.
one of the least, we're the third least diverse county in the
Well,
state.
While
but-
you're, I got a question on that slide, but go ahead.
Which slide?
The one you're on.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay, we're last, 177. You said that's 460 some below average.
I have it.
And I tend to oversimplify. With 25,000 students, that's $12 million. Right? I mean, we look at these numbers per student, and that's a lot of money we're not getting by the formula.
Right. So what they
Correct?
would say.
Right?
Is it's okay to just, we're just
Yes.
going to have the discussion.
Yes.
I'm not going to, okay.
Yeah.
So they would say, on this slide, these are the new blueprint areas. We're getting the same per pupil, per pre-K kid that every other county's getting, wealth equalized. So there's a good bit of pre-K money there. I mean, that's a decent amount of money for us. We're not going to, I think I saw Delegate / State's Attorney Shoemaker nodding his head earlier when I was saying, there's some areas here where we are never going to get any money. I don't believe, not in my lifetime. Concentration of poverty grants, transition grants, those are for, everything's more complicated than what we'll reduce it to here. But in essence, you need to be, at least in the early fiscal years of the blueprint, a county that is below 80% of state poverty to qualify for those programs. We're not going to be there. So those will always be zeros. That skews that number too a little bit if other counties are getting money in those areas. College and career ready, they would say that's equal. That's the number of students you prepare to be deemed college and career ready by 9th grade. So that's true for every county, that your number of kids, however many of them you get to be college and career ready. And then the career ladder, I honest to goodness couldn't tell you how they came up with that number or what that's supposed to represent. We're about a year probably away from the career ladder.
John,
So,
what are transition grants? I was curious. What was that?
transition grants were the grants directly like the amounts are directly legislated for certain counties who I think they were ratcheting up local effort. And they go away eventually after like 5 years of the blueprint.
I think I don't remember why they did it, but I remember that now.
Right, okay. And we're not one of the counties that was legislated. And concentration of poverty grants would be sort of the grants that you could use to build homeschool, or community schools, thank you. Or the wraparound services that are part of community schools. And so we're not going to see that money. And since we're kind of just discussing it now, we didn't address this in the lead-in because this is going to be about the formula and funding, But another concern we have is, in addition to the formula and funding and using it the way they're telling us to use it, every county board of ed has to have a local blueprint implementation plan, and the first version of that will be due on March 15th for every board of ed. And there's part of me that, now the early documents they sent have sort of lessened my initial concerns on this, but part of me finds it hard to believe that Nick Shockney's ever going to be able to turn in a plan and say, we get $0 in concentration of poverty in Carroll County, and we probably never will. So there's nothing you're going to see from us on wraparound services. Please check yes. I think they're probably going to say, you still have to do things. And I guess to your question, Ms. Savigny, they would say, in a county like Carroll, you pay for that locally. So you don't get the grants from us, but there would still be some wraparound services that should be in place for students. And that's, I don't know how else to say it, that's on your ticket. That's, you come up with that, or you make other hard choices. You know, you have higher class sizes in some of your schools. That is truly where this is headed. And you know, I'm kind of giving away the ending, but if you had told me 5 years ago or 10 years ago that I would sit here this evening and tell, because when you see the slide for what we're projecting our revenue next year to be, or even this,
Congrats.
budgeting and when we want to restrict, the truth is it's very restricted. And the best answer they and you turn in paperwork to prove you've done all these things. There's not that kind of paperwork, but they're making us report our expenditures on a monthly basis in all of those columns, and eventually holding us accountable to that, and at the school level. Senator?
So you may be planning to cover this later in the presentation, but in case you're not, this is just the first year of the 10. So what, can you give us a general sense of what happens in years 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, and 10? Does it get worse for Carroll County? Does it stay about the same, or does it get better?
So, sort of to the theme, next year, we now know our certified enrollment. Is it we haven't, superintendent hasn't really even had a chance to share this with the board yet. Are you okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Our certified enrollment for the year we're sitting in, the September 30 enrollment, went up 717.2, so they fund FTE, like 717.25 students.
There's a quarter of a student coming in. That's great.
Which is amazing, and I think is partially attributable to sort of recovery from the pandemic years, and probably a little bit attributable to some positive net migration in Carroll County. It actually, our facilities planner, Bill Kane, does our projections. He's phenomenally accurate. That number, the actual number, is actually within 2 students of the number that Bill predicted for this year and the last projections he did prior to the pandemic.
Oh, wow.
So if you went back to his 2019 projections, we're 2 students off of that. So we're back to where we believed we were going to be. So I don't think we should anticipate 700 kids more every year, because that would be historically crazy for us, but outweigh out of any historical data. But probably maybe 100, maybe 200 kids when you start to look at it, because a lot of that 717, Bill's had some time to analyze it. Those are kids returning from homeschool, or kids returning from private school, but some of it's growth. So to answer your question, Senator West, we anticipate getting before we saw that number, we anticipated in year 2 or fiscal 24, the blueprint, to get about $6 million in new state aid. That changes that to $12 million in anticipated state aid. It's never bad to get more money, especially if you've been here a while. There were some tough years. but it's,
Declining enrollment.
but the restrictions make it a different kind of a discussion than it ever was. And that's what, and it's going to be compensatory ed, and maybe we can demonstrate that in a bit. That's going to be the challenge of everything.
John, I want to just make a comment about the different restrictions. I was here on the board when we did Thornton. They were contemplating Thornton, we worked with MABE through Thornton. And one of the things they did for Thornton is got rid of all those silos, got rid of all those different categories. And we were all thrilled with that the school districts had some flexibility, and they wanted outcomes. And I thought that was a great idea that gave Carroll County flexibility. So it's interesting to me, and I didn't really know that because I don't sit on that committee, but how they've gone back to having the silos, because that was a big deal to getting rid of the silos and letting school districts be accountable for, getting the outcomes based on what they needed in their counties, not determined by the legislature. So I'm not sure why that went back 20 years later to the silos, but I'm disappointed. But the one question that I've had for years, and I'm hoping to put this to rest, has to do with the foundation formula and wealth. Forever, we've been complaining that the way the wealth formula is devised, that we have low industrial tax base and percentage-wise to other counties. And we mostly rely on property tax, income tax from people living here. So they never really looked at that, the way you bring your taxes in versus your industrial tax base, your business tax base. We literally complained for years and years and years. Thornton didn't fix it. And I don't know exactly where it is in the formula, but I know Steve Guthrie sat on the formula committee, and I've asked him about this, and he didn't give me the details, but he pretty much said it's what it is, like it couldn't be fixed. And my question to you is, do you know, is that something that still puts us at a disadvantage because we are a more bedroom county, you call it that, but we are, industrial tax base, I believe, is still low compared to other counties. They call it industrial, but our business tax base. Is that still an issue with where the money comes from? Because we're relying on our citizens versus on the businesses that don't have children in school, that don't affect the budget as much. Is that still an issue, or is that put to rest now that that's not?
It's not an issue, so it's not part of the formula.
No, but should it have been? Because we always argue that it should have been part of the way they calculate wealth, is that they needed to look at that.
I guess, Delegate Krebs, the best answer I can give is they heard it again when they met in the stakeholder group and then the commission, and they determined that it wouldn't be part of wealth. So the way wealth is calculated, and it's like I'm simplifying a lot of things, I understand that, but it's essentially your local property tax, your local income tax divided by your student population. That's what gets you to that ranking. It was raised, I know Steve raised it, I know others raised it in Mako. I think the viewpoint they would have is that gets back to the local question. If you're a county that does have a lot of commercial tax base, then you can make that part of how you fund. As those of you who've been in office for a while, their focus in the education article for school funding is property tax is the prescribed revenue source to fund local education. And it goes on to say, and you can supplement that with other sources too, but that's how they've always viewed it.
No, but you look at like a Baltimore City, and I'm using them as an example. They might have low property tax. I know their tax rate is high, but the values of their assessments are low. They don't bring in a lot of income tax, a lot of poverty as looked at in here. However, they have a lot of economics. They have a lot of stuff going on down there. So they bring in a lot of money from businesses and from those type. That's not in the wealth formula, the way I understand it.
It is not.
And that just it's always seemed wrong to me, just the basis of the wealth formula, but I don't know how, it's not going to get fixed in my lifetime because this will be in. I don't know how to fix it, but it seems like that we're at a disadvantage from that, and other places are at an advantage to it. Mm-hmm. And you fundamentally start off with a formula that I don't think is accurate, the wealth formula.
It is certainly not there still, and they've made another 10-year commitment that it won't be there.
Let's not worry about it.
And John, and I know you want to get to telling us more about the restrictions, which I think are important to talk about, what they specifically more are. I was going to echo that because I think that what the state looks at, the dominant political outlook from the state, they look at state funding as equalizing disparities in counties where a county that has a better, is more wealthy, can afford to have higher property taxes perhaps, or have a higher property tax base. They look at state funds as a way to fill in those gaps and equalize those gaps, which is why you have a poverty. And I think most of us agree there should be some accounting for poverty, but unfortunately they've gone to an extreme where the way they calculate wealth. But I think you're pointing out correctly what the orientation is, that state funds are here to fill in gaps as opposed to they give everybody a baseline, but then they want
Baseline,
anything
and then-
extra is filling in gaps. And your county, if you're wealthy enough, you can just make up the difference. The problem, of course, is that it's easy to say that, but when most of your revenue comes from homeowners and individuals, that, you know, it falls heavily on the individuals. And our county's made progress in our commercial tax base, but we're still relatively low compared to a lot of the other counties. So.
And to just add on to what Delegate Krebs shared, it used to be that we were held accountable by the state for our student achievement results. And how we got there was up to us. Now, we are still accountable for the student achievement results, but we're also accountable for how we spend the money to get to those results. So we're being held accountable in two places now, spending our money in a certain way and getting the results we're supposed to get.
Seems to me if you already are getting good results, they should allow you the flexibility to continue to get those results. And if you're not getting results, then they should hold your hand. It just, incentive-wise, just seems to me.
Yeah, and I think John's going to get to this later when we see the restrictions, but it's almost like the way that we're going to have to be spending the money, we're going to end up with worse results overall, potentially. Like, it's a negative impact. And
Yeah, the potential is here to, and I want to qualify words because I don't know what the right word will turn out to be. Significantly, dramatically, in meaningful, observable ways, change the way in which we run our schools. It will compel us to do that when they eventually ratchet down the accountability. Because I think we have a year or two where there's not sort of a hammer for how you're spending. We are not spending aligned with this formula today, and they know that because some of us spent a lot of time saying to them last year, we're developing a budget, we're negotiating union contracts. If this money is going to turn out to be really restricted, let us know because that's going to be a problem for us. And there weren't a lot of clear answers on that. Those answers have become clearer. What isn't clear, at least to me yet, and I don't know if our CFO has heard something more recently, but it's not really clear on when you better be doing this or else sort of a thing. I don't know if that's fiscal 25 or after that, or if through the planning process there'll be sort of, as long as you're stepping in that direction, that'll be okay with us. And that would be nice to know, but at the same time, as everyone here knows, but especially the board members, but yet how you make budgetary decisions now carry forward. And so, are you deferring pain to a later date, or are you actually even compounding the pain you're going to feel on a later date?
We can't defer it too much.
Yeah. But moving in the way they want us to move is not consistent with how we've operated. I think there's a lot of reasons for that. I had a conversation with Board President Carroll the other day kind of on this topic, and he made a point that resonated with me to say, because of our demographics, Carroll County is not a place where one school here looks so dramatically different than another school there. And that is true in some counties. And the state tries to recognize that, I guess, to their credit. So we haven't necessarily wanted to or had to do a lot of different approach to services in schools or staffing in schools or that sort of thing. And then another thing that's not lost on me, and the superintendent reminded me today and made me look it up. Between fiscal year 9, which was sort of the onset of the recession or the bad economic times, and fiscal year 19, which is sort of that decade, and the last year we made meaningful reductions, mainly due to a loss in state aid, due to declining enrollment. We cut 229 instructional FTE over the course of that time period. We had to. We didn't have any choice. We were also losing enrollment, so at a certain point, the board stayed away from teaching in a classroom FTE, teachers and assistants, for a couple of years, but eventually you can. If 85%, let's say, of your budget is people, and 68% of your people are teachers, you can't stay away from the classroom for a decade. So we cut 229 instructional FTE. Almost none of those were RIFT. It was just as people retired, we did a retirement incentive at one point to free up some FTE to reduce. But it sure would be good to have some or most of those FTE back now to cushion what the restrictions what the restricted use of funds is going to bring about. So I think Carroll is, maybe differently than many other counties, is kind of like, there's a lot of unique things here that don't line up so great now for this. A couple of you represent more than one jurisdiction, and you may well hear from that Board of Ed that this isn't such a bad thing at all. And I think that's fair and probably accurate. I've had some colleagues, sort of shush me on some of the statewide calls saying, hey, stop it, so.
And I would just add to that, that because we've been cutting things for 10, 15 years, we don't have any cushion. We don't have a place to go to take from to fund over here instead. And so a lot of the other districts have that. They can repurpose.
I'm sure they do.
Yes, they can repurpose some money or some FTE that they have, let's say, in central office, or they have over here. We can't do that. We're already cut to the bone everywhere because we've been cutting for so many years. So that's why we get to a place where we're going to have to say class sizes in this school over here might be higher than class sizes in this school over there, because that's the only thing we have to work with is our school FTE at this point, because we've cut everywhere else over the last many years.
And I know it's always been a priority that whatever we cut, we really didn't want it to have a severe impact on classroom instruction.
Right.
So when you start talking about the larger class sizes, it certainly will have an impact, I would think, on classroom instruction.
And how will parents feel if at one school there are class sizes of 37 and at another school there are class sizes of 18? That's going to be something that we could face, having to make these decisions about what we're going to do with the money, while meeting all of the requirements of Blueprint. And so that's the really difficult situation that we're getting to, and John will get to that in the presentation.
I'll try to speed up and get there.
I don't know if you were getting to this, but you were talking about accountability. So obviously right now you said it's not a big deal. Well, it is a big deal, but year 1, year 2, no one's holding you accountable right now. When we get to year 3, year 4, and if we're not checking all boxes, I mean, do they
penalty?
do they take the little amount of money they're giving us anyway?
So presumably, and this is, I'm not sure the answer, but presumably, my guess is, the reason I gave that timeline, my guess is accountability will flow when we have our first plan in place, submitted and accepted. Will be measured sort of as instructional outcomes against that, but they're also checking expenditures, so I think there'll be a measurement of your expenditures and your success on the plan. The sort of the general provision in the blueprint for the penalty is that the state would withhold up to 25% of your your next year's state funding.
Wow.
Whether that would actually happen the first time something happened or not is probably not the case, but you certainly don't want to act like it's nothing. I mean, it definitely, yeah.
Well, we're already in last place, so we can't.
Still like
Just a couple comments, and Delegate Shoemaker maybe will remember this as well. I mean, we listened to this for several years in a row. I recall some of the justification was that they weren't worried about class sizes, that was not something that they cared about. That's number one, a point that has to be made. And then number two, and just speaking with a fellow delegate that actually sits on the Appropriations Committee, I know there's like a 180 page report that just came out. I have it earmarked and I have not read the entire thing yet. We're not the only county that is in a position of we're not going to be able to do all of these things. And so the discussion was in our last meeting, a briefing from him, is that in a bipartisan way, there's a lot of counties that are going to have problems with this, and that the overall sense is that there's a lot of things that are going to have to be revisited. And just to make a note too, as our new incoming governor, his chief of staff, or one of his chief of staffs, actually sat on that committee to start implementing Blueprint. So I think that there is certainly an opportunity to have a decent conversation of, you know, it's one thing to come up with this giant bill, and that was a lot of our argument during the entire process. Now, the rubber's meeting the road, and now we've got to figure out a way how to do this in a way that is going to make sense and not be painful to every single jurisdiction, and certainly, you know, certainly ours. So those are just my comments.
I think that's fair, and I think to be fair, you know, I would think, I would hope, I would really even believe that they're not going to rush to penalty, because this has been frustrating for everybody, and I would think they would admit it's been frustrating for them. They were kind of slow getting up and running, and I'm not trying to ascribe blame. It just took a while to even form an AIB and staff an AIB, and MSDE is under some reconstruction. And so I think there will be a general recognition that this is massive. I mean, you are changing the way K-12, pre-K through 12 education works. So to harshly punish people for not being there immediately, or where, I would hope that that wouldn't turn out to be the case. You would know better than me if there's any forecast to make any revisions here. I know that last year they revised the timeline for the AIB to do the state report, and that may be what you're referring to, the comprehensive state plan.
Yeah.
But when the state superintendent wanted to revise the timeline to sort of push the definition and everything that goes with college and career ready, they weren't willing to do that, which I thought was interesting. And if I wanted to be really snide, I would find it interesting that the board in charge of accountability, when confronted with one due date, changed their due date legislatively, but is unwilling to, at least at face value, change anyone else's timelines.
And I
But
would also think we've got to continue to focus on student achievement. We have always been a high-achieving school district for many reasons. For them to penalize a high-achieving school district because they didn't follow some rules about how to spend the money, it would look pretty bad for them. And we need to continue to remind them this is about outcomes and instead of inputs. And one of my arguments for years and years and years in Maryland is that we always used to measure inputs. How much do we spend? How do we do this? Instead of looking at outputs. And we've got to make sure that we all have the conversation and say, at the end of the day, it's about student achievement. Are we getting there or not? And to penalize a county because they didn't spend the buckets of money they wanted to, when we're I assume we're going to continue to be a high-achieving county, we would look pretty ridiculous, because that's what the focus should be on. Is this getting results? And if it does, let us get the results how we can get them. But, I mean, that conversation needs to continue to remind all of the policymakers it's about student results. And I know this board knows that, and our county knows that, but sometimes other people don't think of it in that term.
I'll try to scoot through some of this as quick as I can. I do want to bring this up because this is very new and very different, and at least here for us, creates kind of an unnecessary, and unfortunate, I guess I would say, little bit of tension between us and what's been a really great partner in Carroll Community College, because we're now paying under the law today, not even next year, we pay 75% of tuition to Carroll Community for students who take a dual enrollment course at the college, some of which we deliver for them in our schools, a few of those courses. So this is an FY23 number that is not budgeted or was not budgeted, and I'm projecting $700,000 based on the fall tuition bill. So, you know, so this is a weird thing to me because we've never been kind of like a pass-through agency, and the blueprint sets us up that way in these two instances, this and the next one. And secondly, you know, now I'm having kind of difficult conversations with my peers over there who I've always loved, saying, you know, this isn't good from it's good from their perspective, but this isn't good from my perspective.
How was it? I'm not trying to stall you. How was it before? How did this get funded before?
So this dual enrollment was enacted a couple of sessions ago under Senate Bill 740, and you had to enact an MOU with the local. We did with Carroll and Senator. You might know better. We paid three. Is it 3 or 7, Eric? What were we paying? We paid 3% of tuition, I think.
Oh.
Very, very minor.
And
It never even, we never even thought about it in our budgeting talks.
It was maybe $50,000 a year, and so at the end of the day, that's not a big deal. So this is 75% of what they're charging for tuition, and parents or students, however you want to view it, cannot be charged by law. And starting next fiscal year, so not this year, but next fiscal year, they also can't be charged for fees So your, your college technology fee or a book fee or whatever, we'll have to pick up that cost as well.
So the college now pays 25 and you pay 75, or the?
Yeah,
Correct.
I guess they would say we eat 25% of tuition, however they would tell you, we're not winning here, and to be fair,
the
you'll hear
college-
from them.
They're
when they
not
say-
either. I know they're
Yeah,
not with
they'll
this.
But the
say-
college ate that money last year, right?
The college could bill the parents for the balance except
Oh,
for
they
farm
could.
students, except for farm
Okay.
students who couldn't be charged.
But now they
the-
can't.
They cannot now. In fact, they had to refund their fall tuition and bill us for it.
But-
And this will go up even higher because under the blueprint, the college and career, you have to be identified whether you're college and career ready in ninth grade, and then you're either, sent on a pathway to become college and career ready, or you have to go through a post-CCR pathway. One of those is dual enrollment. It could be an IB model or a collection of advanced placement courses, but also for career and tech students, there's a whole separate pathway and those courses come with very high fees, and so we'll be paying that too. So after this year, there's no fees charged so that number of 700, if that proves accurate, will be higher than that. So-
I think about it this way. We have to pay $700,000 this year, this voice, in a time when parents didn't know that they weren't going to have to pay anything. So think about what's going to happen to that $700,000 figure when parents find out that their students can take dual enrollment courses and they don't have to pay anything for it. So now we're looking at, are we going to have to budget $2 million, $3 million? What's this going to do over the course of the next 10 years?
Absolutely, and I've already heard students speaking to that point as well, because I know students, especially with summer courses were never paid for by the students. That was separated from the school. So students would avoid summer courses because of the cost. So now that we have this another option where now students or their parents don't have to pay for it, I've already heard students saying, well, I'm going to add on a bunch more dual enrollment classes.
Which, by the way, is a great thing technically,
Yes.
but not,
Yes.
yeah, right, yeah.
How many students are doing it now, roughly?
Eric, do you have a sense of how many students?
Now that we brought it up a public meeting, they're all going to know about it.
Total? I don't have that. I mean, like roughly? Actually.
He might be able to look it up.
We can find out.
Senator Reedy just made a great point. Like, as much as I also sort of hate sitting in a room uncomfortably with Dr. Ball and Mr. Schuman and others, and at the end of the day, you're also sitting there saying, what I'm saying is bad for kids. Like, this is a good thing for kids, but it's also a business decision because.
Well, but if they're gonna restrict all your money and then have these extra added fees, then we got to figure something out.
But we do need to rethink that. So we do need to think, because there's a whole nother part of the blueprint that's not on the docket for tonight, but teacher salary is a part of it, teacher time is a part of it. So there's a cost that's hard to handle. We also don't control their tuition and fees, so I'm not even sure what, that's a whole other conversation. But one of the things I've said to them is, my recommendation will be, our teachers aren't teaching these courses anymore. And that's not spite, this
No,
is
it's
the
just
business
reality,
problem.
yeah.
And these teachers in a couple of years have to have a certain percentage of classroom time and a certain percentage of not classroom time. So I don't know how much of their time we can dedicate to teaching your courses in our school. So this is like an unintended ugly consequence that kind of harms a great partnership that's existed for a long time.
John, real quick, I was going to ask, are students held accountable to this, where they have to maintain a specific GPA?
That's a good point.
Because if they end up, failing a class, they could lose that assistance. I mean, is there something like that in place?
I don't know that there's something in place where we would say, now you have to pay us the tuition, but there are conditions to being able to participate in dual enrollment. So if you didn't do well in your first attempt, you wouldn't automatically be allowed to go back and do it again. And that's part of the MOU with the college, where we work out entrance requirements, eligibility, that sort of thing. So there are some safeguards in place that way, yeah. The next area where we pass through some money or transfer some money is we have to send $62 per student to the local workforce development board. In our case, there is a Carroll local workforce development board. Other parts of the state, it's regional and that sort of thing. I don't know a ton about this yet, and I think they're still getting guidance from GWIB, and they probably know more now than they did the first time we had a conversation. What I can tell you is this was a Senator Rosapep thing, and I don't fully understand it. But it's another place where we have to send $1.6 million next year. But it may be that it's not that clear cut. It may also be that we have an agreement with the local workforce board where we provide some of those services to. So that might not be a straight $1.6 million out of the budget. But if it is, that's a problem. Yes.
I sit on the GWIS, now the workforce development, same thing. I'll have that conversation with them. I think board meeting is this week or next Wednesday. It's either tomorrow or next week. But yeah, I've been sitting on the workforce development board for years. This has not come up, so that's interesting.
I think that all of us are trying to catch up to the blueprint train, and they are too.
That makes perfect sense. So, okay, I'll take this.
Ms. McCabe, what happens to some of the staff that we have that works with career development
do
for
that.
students?
We don't know yet. We've started to have some preliminary conversations, but until we get more details about what this looks like, we're not sure how it will impact the staff that we already have doing some of these things.
Because I will say I will worry about that. Like, are we paying two different entities to do one job? And
We won't be. We'll have to make some tough decisions.
Okay.
Right, and I'd like to know what the accountability measures are, like, so for the 1.6 million that we're potentially going to be paying to an outside firm, how do we, what do we get from that? Like, what are the accountability measures? What are the metrics that they need to hit in terms of providing these services to our students?
So it does require an MOU, and it also does require, when Delegate Rose referred to the 180-some page plan, that's the state implementation plan. Every local Board of Ed has a template we fill out to become part of that state plan. The local workforce development boards will have to as well, and so there should be some things measurable in there too. I will also say that, so when I say I don't know much about it, I think that is true, but what I kind of do know is Senator Rosapep's intent was that if you have to make this decision sort of in ninth grade, and I'm being a little bit tongue-in-cheek, like, what am I going to do with the rest of my life? Because you're going to put me on this pathway in ninth grade. As a person who's still not sure what he should be doing with the rest of his life, man. This is intended to get down to the sixth grade level. So, it's sort of like you go into maybe not literally, but into the home of sixth graders to say, hey, you need to be thinking about getting college and career ready. And then what are the career pathways available to you, kind of thing.
Which I will always argue. I mean, a sixth grader, they still don't know if they want mac and cheese or butter noodles for dinner sometimes. So, for them to start making career decisions, to me, is just, they're not mature enough, to me, to start making that discussion. It's just...
I do not disagree with that.
I think it's somewhat conceptual at this point.
It is somewhat conceptual.
It's like an idea. It's,
Right.
But
okay, back to the money. So there is a state and local share. The formula does not do away with maintenance of effort. It could modify maintenance of effort. In some counties, that would be maybe sooner than later. In Carroll, I don't see that being anytime soon. But I know Mr. Kyler likes to talk about local control. This is not a law about local control. So there is a state share, which is what you saw earlier with all the counties. There is also a required local share of funding for certain program areas. And the restrictions and the spending accountability applies to both the state and the local share, not just to the state aid. The way it kind of works loosely is if you ever got to the point as a county where your local share, your required share under the blueprint is greater than what your statutory requirement under MOE is, then the share would replace MOE. But in Carroll, you're nowhere near MOE and you're nowhere near, exceeding local share. So unless politically or policy MOE became a discussion, that doesn't effectively impact us in any way, if that makes any sense. But here are the numbers together. So here are the state numbers from the previous slides that had the formula county by county. Here are the required local shares for certain program areas. To the point I hopefully just made, this is not all of the money we get from the county. This is just what the blueprint requires.
We're above, the county's a
We
good
are
bit above
above
that.
this money, which is why local share and MOE is not really a conversation for us yet, and probably won't be in any foreseeable time period. But what they are saying is, you will spend at least these amounts of money in these program areas, and you will show us that you have, and you will spend 75% of the money in these program areas at the school level, and you will show us that you have done that. And so, like, when I said there's some things that I'm not sure how they've come up with this, and I understand that I think they're about to reemploy Augenblick, Palish, and Associates, or whatever the firm that you've used for Thornton and for the commission, to really look at the foundation amount again. And that's good. I mean, they should do that. But like in the commission report and in the law, the foundation is supposed to pay, that includes salaries, teacher time, career counseling, behavioral health, instruction, maintenance and operations, supplies and materials, or in educational technology. It does not. That is not how much money we spend on all of those things. We spend more money than that on all of those things. So, it's not worth it because it doesn't matter, but I'm not quite sure how they came up with some of their philosophies here. Transportation, there is no required local share under the blueprint. It's just not part of the blueprint. But we spend way more than $11,800,000 on transportation every year. We spend 26 to 28 million a year on transportation. So there's parts here that I don't know why or why not, if that makes any sense.
Well, yeah, what we're trying to say is that the foundation, the money we get in our foundation does not cover for us what it's supposed to cover.
Right. And we're building to this crescendo of.
But you're getting more money than you got last year from the state.
Correct.
Yes.
So why does it?
It's in buckets.
Because we're getting, the more money that we're getting is in restricted buckets.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, so let's try to get
So
there.
John, can I ask that, so the 25 million that you've got under compensatory education, the
Yes.
25.69 million, that's what this example is meant
Mostly
to
it's
try to
about
tie
that,
to?
yeah.
Okay.
The compensatory ed is the problem here. If it were just ELL, we could deal with that, but it's compensatory ed, and maybe I'll skip to that. I don't know. Here are some costs that we anticipate. These would be next year costs under the blueprint. If you want, I can talk about them or come back to them. Here are costs that are outside of the blueprint, kind of to the point I was just making. The blueprint's not really about everything. There's a lot of other things we're spending money on. The blueprint doesn't really legislate salary for non-teachers. That's up to you locally to figure out. Never having served in a role in collective bargaining, I would suggest, is another disconnect that may exist among the policymakers and the people who are in charge of this. Inflationary impacts, that would mainly be healthcare and retiree healthcare. Those would be the largest drivers there, but the blueprint doesn't, well, the foundation does have an inflationary factor. I think they would all admit that no one foresaw inflation being where it is today at the time that this was enacted, so maybe there's something to reconsider there.
Actually, it's funny, when it was passed, John, there was a trigger put in because we thought there
Yes.
might be a dramatic, I mean, I
Correct.
didn't vote for it, but there
That's
was a
true.
trigger put in, because we thought we might have this dramatic drop in revenue over many years with COVID. Because they passed this right as we were heading into COVID. It's a great idea,
Right.
totally predictable situation to pass a 10-year, multi-billion-dollar,
Federal money helped with a lot of that. But the point here being, we have blueprint required costs. We also have other costs that will be needed to run the school system and to maybe address some of the Board of Ed's other priorities. Here is a glimpse at where we sit today. It's early, but where we sit today, believing that our revenue might be for next year. And I have this here for another reason, to kind of compare and contrast what restricted means. With the additional 717 students, our prediction is somewhat of an educated prediction. We're running their formula, but we were predicting 6.6 million in new aid. Now we're going to say that should be 12. In the county plan, depending on how Commissioner Rothstein would want us to look at the $2 million in one-time funding. $2 million that came to us this year was designated as one-time funding, so that's either 6.7 or 4.7, depending on how you want to view that. So 18.7 is what we would say is their anticipated revenue. And this is how, more or less, it's obviously a lot more time and thought goes into this, but in general, this is how we've historically budgeted under the Thornton formula, which came without restrictions. You project your revenue. You know that there are things you have to pay for, whether that's inflationary costs or blue state mandated requirements, and then you prioritize other needs, and you say if our revenue is going to be 18.7 million, let's see what that buys, and then let's deal with what that doesn't buy or readjust priorities. And so I just put this in to sort of compare and contrast what's to come next. So historically, this is what the board and the superintendent would do. They would say, okay, we think we're going to get 18.7 million. We have to do all of these blueprint things, so we just start deducting from 18.7 million, and we carry that forward. We're now down to 7 million, 6.9 million. We deduct a couple more things, and when we get to inflation, we run out of money. So that can't be, because you have to pay for inflation. So now you have to go back and sort this out and make some tough choices. That's how we've budgeted. I think that's how most places have budgeted. I'm sure that's how all places have budgeted. This is what the blueprint's not going to allow anymore, whether that's next year or 25 or whenever. We're going to have to budget in a way that we spend the money in the program areas and at the schools. And I think to all of the points that Mrs. McKay's been making all night, that's going to have some impact. And it's kind of hard to sit here early in the process and say it will be absolutely this or absolutely that. But I do think it's safe to say it is absolutely going to affect how services are distributed across schools, whether that's staffing FTE, whether that's other programs, additional resources. It's going to impact that, and the only way for it not to impact that is if Carroll County would buy into the state's theory that you make that up locally. Like, if you don't have to, but if you don't want those disparities as you see them, then that's up to you. We don't care if you fix those.
John, has that sort of been done anyway with special ed? Doesn't the special ed money pretty much follow the students in the schools?
Largely, if you want to get as close to any area, it would be special. ELL too, but we haven't spent near this amount of money on students. But we're not spending ELL money outside of the ESOL area. These are the three amounts that are really the restricted issue. To Dr. Dorsey's point, I don't think special ed's the biggest challenge. We spend that much money in special ed or more every year. ELL, we probably spend maybe $2 million, so that's another $1 million or so we'll have to adjust for. But compensatory ed, we do not spend $26 million in the way in which they want it spent. Based on looking at the expenditure reporting that they're having us do and gearing up for that eventual due date or when there's a hammer, so to speak, our best estimate is we're spending maybe $300,000 in a way that they would count it as expenditures.
So what's an example of that? What's an example of compensatory? What do they mean by that?
They just mean if you have that many farms students, you should be recognizing that that's a population of students who may be at risk in some way and who should have additional services or
We don't have
later.
that many, so.
We don't have as many as everyone else, but we do have some. And so, Senator, for instance, I do think that this is less of a lift in other counties for a lot of factors. Many of the things we talked about tonight, a decade of cuts, declining enrollment and now bouncing back. The fact that the difference between our community schools is not as far a swing as in other places, but we have generally staffed our schools on an equitable basis. We're going to shoot for the same class size in every elementary school. We're going to try to put
You mean on an equal basis?
on an equal basis. Yeah,
You said equitable.
I'm sorry. And to Dr. Dorsey's point, we staff special ed on sort of a service hour equal basis. However many service hours students need, we try to put the amount of special ed staff. Same thing with ELL.
Other counties can't do that because they may have 3 schools that have a much bigger population of a certain group.
And you're right. And where we've tried to layer services or stack services, I think you'll start to hear the state, the AIB, and the MSD say terms like that. we've done it mainly in Title I schools, federally identified Title I schools with federal funds. And we don't, if you're the lowest, we don't receive a lot of Title I funds. And as those have shrunk over the years, based on relative, percentage of the farm students, we've actually reduced the number of schools we identify as Title I to try to make more of that money with. It used to be 5 elementary schools, it's now 3. We've never looked at middle schools or high schools, certainly. So the extra resources that we've layered or we've stacked have tended to be with the title program funds and things like that. I think in other counties, I know in my own past, counties that have very different demographics, different funding patterns, maybe they do have a bit of a different staffing formula for schools that maybe would qualify now as concentration of poverty or higher poverty schools. And so they might have less of a gap to bridge here when you apply the restrictions that they're talking about. But it is, to Dr. Dorsey's point, to the small amount for ELL, it is the compensatory ed restriction that's kind of the whammy here. Because they're going to, and I don't know where I am now, but they're going to want to see 75%. This is just if this year, like if it were due this year, they're going to want to see 75% of 26 million spent within compensatory ed at the school level. So to me, the way that would look is through services. And for us, that's typically been staffing, but they wouldn't dictate that. The state wouldn't say it has to be teachers or it has to be teachers and assistants. They would say you could buy intervention programs, you could, any services that affect those kids. But what they want to say is when you get into your student populations, school by school, put that on a per pupil basis, so to speak, and show us that you're spending that amount at that school and that amount at that school and that amount at the next school. And I've been back and forth with this. I've even hesitated to almost pull this out because I think it has the potential to be misunderstood. But in your packet beyond your spreadsheet, we did try to do a little exercise to suggest what that means. But before I do this, let me qualify this many ways. This is not real. This is meant to be an exercise to try to help understand what they're saying, but nobody should take this very literally and leave here tonight saying, oh my gosh, the class size at this school will go up. That's not what I'm going for, and I'm not.
School board is proposing. No,
But if you have the other packet, that's not the PowerPoint, you have 6 sheets of paper. 2 of them apply to elementary schools, 2 of them apply to middle, and 2 of them apply to high. I'm going to just talk from the elementary school sheets. The first one, or hopefully the one on the top that has sort of a separated title that says FY23 CCPS Elementary Schools Enrollment and Staffing. These are actuals. And I blacked out Carroll Springs because that's our special ed center. We usually count it as an elementary school, but it's a unique center. These are our actuals. These are our K-5 enrollments in each of these schools. And of those enrollments, so if we're looking at let me not do, Carrolltown's okay. On the screen, if you see certain boxes blacked out, under FERPA rules, we're not able to identify schools that have a subpopulation of 5 or less because you could get to maybe who those students are. So that's why some are blocked out on the screen. But with Carrolltown, not to be patronizing, but Carrolltown has 598 actual students. 58 of those 598 are identified as farm students. 79 of that 598 are special ed students, and 6 are ELL students. Those are actuals. And then, if you follow this out school by school, this is how we're staffing those schools. That's how many classroom teachers they have. That's how many special educators they have. That's how many ESOL teachers or ELL teachers they have. And then these are the official class sizes from the annual class size report that the Board of Ed just received last month. So that's an actual look at how schools run today. This one's real, and this one you can leave saying, okay, that's very real. The next one, for the sake of trying to come up with any example that would be meaningful to really understand what the restrictions on the funding means, this is just a theoretical exercise. So I did take the comp ed number, I did take the special ed whole dollar number, I did take the ELL number, and I did put it on a per pupil basis. And I did take 75% of that total, which is the minimum requirement. And I said, okay, if I was going to take that money and give it out to schools based on where those students are, I'll do that in the form of teaching positions. Okay, so I'm taking that money and I'm saying for this exercise, I'm going to convert that to teaching FTE based on the amount of money we use to budget a teaching position. So again, not real. This doesn't include assistants and other folks who work in schools. This is just if we did what they're saying to do. And then based on that number of students in each of these categories in each of these schools, that leads you to how many teachers is that worth. I filled in what those FTE would be for those areas. And that's really what they want us to do. And they will say,
Pull those out of the regular classrooms and make them
Well-
dedicated to providing comp ed services?
well, they're just saying you have to spend that money in those program areas where these kids are. So I'm just saying, for the sake of showing what that looks like in some way, I'm going to convert that money to teaching FTE and show it that way. Doesn't have to be teaching FTE, and that's why you shouldn't leave here tonight saying that beyond a shadow of a doubt, the class size at this school will change this exact amount. It won't, because it's not
You would
that
do other
clear.
things. You would not only
The
do
other
FTE.
things. And I would hope, I have to believe that the state will let us weight this eventually, so that it's not literally the same at every school across the system, because if you do that, you don't really recognize the needs of kids at special ed sites and other types of students. But just to show what they're saying to do, that's what I did. And the biggest change comes in comp ed, because we do not staff, or we do not budget and operate in a way where we restrict money into a sort of column and spend it at the school level. So if you wanted to do that and show it in teacher FTE, we would create this many teacher FTE at each of our elementary schools. And for the special ed money, we would create that many FTE at each of the schools. And for the ELM money, the same thing. And then the first column, teacher FTE, is just the balance of what they have today minus those categories, if you're kind of building it back up. And by the way, they say those things to us. So everybody in this organization, it feels like, has at least one blueprint meeting a month or more, statewide meeting. And when you're on the CFO meetings, and for folks that budget and folks like me, sometimes we can get a little linear and say things like, but that's not what we do. That's not how we've done it. They will say, you have got to stop thinking that way. You have got to stop thinking about what you've always done. Start thinking about how would you build this from the ground up if that's what you were going to do, because that is what you're going to do.
But
That
John,
is
one
what
of the
we're telling
things
you
it
to
sounds
do.
like they're getting back to, which I disagree with, I mean, over the years, we used to have separate special ed, and we had separate different things. Over the years, we want everything to be inclusive. You want people in the classroom, you want them integrated. It almost sounds like they want you to be not integrated anymore, because how do you track it? Or do you just track that this, I mean, inclusiveness about putting these children in with everyone else, whether it's special ed or whether it's, a comp ed, they're basically telling you got to do it separate, or somehow to track it separate, when we've been talking about inclusiveness for the last, 3 decades.
Well, they're
Came to the same
tracking
conclusion,
expenditures.
Susan, as I was reading through this.
Like,
I was
they
like,
were
it
like-
almost
it
feels
sounds
like
like they
the
want you to go
opposite of
backwards.
diversity and inclusion.
Yes.
I
It's like you're.
I think what they would say is something more like this. You should sort of have a baseline of staffing. But in schools that have higher number of farm students, you should layer or stack services on top of that in those schools. And that might not be just teacher FTE. That might be resource teachers. That might be behavior therapists. That might be a whole school
But
psychologist.
it doesn't mean that the rest of the students can't benefit from that, does it? From
No,
those students?
I don't think it means that at all. But what it does mean, probably going back to the beginning, is if that's what we have to do, then we can't have the same staffing we can't have the same baseline of staffing we've always had in all of our schools. Because we're funded today to operate on X FTE of teachers. And if some of those teachers now, a good portion of those teachers are mandatorily by restriction we're going to be compelled to put them in certain schools based on needs, based on
Plus,
student
your farm
populations.
students, just because you're a farm or comp student, doesn't mean that you need the services. You might have a non-farm student that needs services. in different ways. So you're basically assuming that, hey, because you're poor, you need more services. And that's not always true. And because you're over the poverty line, you don't need services. It seems like this has become more exclusionary. It's the opposite of what I would think the direction we're going, at least the way it sounds. The way, of how they.
They do believe that.
But are we, yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, so, and are we being too literal about this in our interpretation of some of this? Because, resource teachers and things like that at the elementary schools, they're providing services to the students who need it. Not necessarily a one-to-one correlation with farms, but they're giving it to the students who need it, which is how it should work.
Yeah, I'm not saying that.
And so could resource teachers be, part of this allocation of the 25 million, right?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think they would say those teachers need to be in that school and can only work with farms kids. They would, they would serve the entire
And their funding
school.
would still count as comp.
Still would count, yeah. They wouldn't penalize us for that. I guess what we're getting at, and I knew, I couldn't come up with anything better. This is just to illustrate, if it were reduced to teaching FTE, they're
This is how it
saying
would play
spend
out
it
for
this
the rest,
way. But at the end of the day, whether it's teaching FTE or teachers and assistants or resources or mental health employees or whatever you could think of, or programs you buy, just a remediation program or software or whatever it is you're going to put in those schools, you're going to redistribute how you've done that historically, Carroll County and others. But it's taking from your total pool of funding, or it's taking from your total pool of FTE, if you will, in this example, and it leaves less for how we've traditionally approached it. So if it's people, and it will largely be people, whether it's literally classroom teachers or
When your budget is 88% people.
it's going to be people in some way. It reduces overall across the system how many other positions there could be to keep class sizes cannot remain the same. They can't. And the only way they can is if local funding supplements it to sort of bridge that gap. Unless anyone sees it differently, there's no way around that. That's what this is about.
It might even be worse. This doesn't include additional planning time and collaboration time and educators
And
being in less
salaries.
in the classroom. That's going to make this worse.
That's a whole other layer that's not pictured here. The only mention
But it's
I
going to
made-
be happening at the same time.
Bargaining a career ladder and salary is not pictured here. Hiring, so even if you could get to 60-40 on teachers, there's like another place where I would respectfully say there's a disconnect of reality is there a supply and demand of teachers to actually hire the number of teachers needed to get to a 60-40 split of time? So, yeah, none of that's here. But at the end of the day, and maybe I shouldn't have even, at the end of the day, we will be required to reapportion our resources, and that will leave what's left.
I would
change.
say, in simplified terms, at a 30,000-foot view, what they're telling us to do is take the pool of money that you have, and in the past, we've pretty much divvied that equally among the schools. And now they're saying divvy it equitably among the schools. So that's the biggest difference, is that they're restricting us based on equity factors versus giving everybody about the same and having it be equal.
But in our county, there's not pockets of, I mean, I'm sure there's schools that aren't exactly all equal, whatever, but there's not, in most cases, schools that are significantly more inequitable than the other as far as the dispersion of the groups that they would call, that need this equitable distribution, right?
Yeah, we don't have an underperforming school.
It's
Other
it's
counties
enough,
do.
that it's enough,
I know
though.
we have some Title I schools, but I mean,
Yeah.
as far as,
But even outside of Title I schools, it's enough that we would have to look at our teacher pool and be moving teachers around and having more teachers over here and fewer teachers over
but
here.
only based on the population that fit in certain categories, not
Correct.
because of how they're performing.
Correct.
Yeah, that's crazy. It should be about
Yeah, the
performance.
Like, if we had really poorly performing schools, I'd say, yeah, you do need to, you know. And I think this is the problem. This has all been written to try to deal with problems in some areas of the state that did not exist really here and in some other places. Even the siloing, I think, is almost like an accountability measure, which we might argue some places need to know that the money's actually being spent in the class. I love hearing that it should be spent in the classroom. Of course, we've always tried to spend. I would wonder, not to get on a rabbit trail, I'd love to know, I would bet on some of our categories, we are more than 75% of the schools. We don't have a high overhead. We've already talked about that. So the only question, looking at solutions for this, the problem is to try to solve this, you have to, whatever you do has to apply statewide. We can't go in and ask for a Carroll County carve out. So I don't know if there's maybe a way that we could ask for, if we're doing well in X number of categories, can we have more flexibility? I think that's probably the question. Are you hearing, or any of you hearing from your colleagues in other counties? I know you said some of your colleagues are like, no, be quiet, this is good for us. But
What I'm hearing from other superintendents is we need to be asking for more money to be put in the foundation versus the buckets, the restricted buckets. If we had more of the total put in our foundation, we would be much better off.
Or the other thing you could ask, and think of this, is that you could get some type of a waiver from some of the buckets, even percentage of if you have a certain amount of student achievement and appropriately performing schools, or something that ties it to your school achievement, to student achievement, and that way you can say, gosh, we're doing these things, give us the flexibility, we've earned it. And there's got to be a way to measure that. They're going back to looking at inputs, and we've got to start the thinking of the outputs. How do we encourage school districts to do things well? And maybe we can change some things, but if you're doing something well, why are they changing the fundamental way we do business? Maybe they should look to us and say, hey, why don't you try to be like Carroll County? But doing some type of a waiver or some type of flexibility if you're able to reach a certain level of achievement with your schools. I don't know what the answer to that is, but just that line of thinking to give us some flexibility, or get more money in the foundation. I don't know if they're going to do that, take money out of compensatory ed and put it in foundation, but maybe for those school systems that can handle that, they could take 50% and move it over. But it'd be nice to have some type of a proposal to put out there, and even for you guys to be able to advocate for on the committees, just to have a conversation about.
So this doesn't necessarily even take, so I understand your example of kind of showing what happens to class sizes, and it's pretty dramatic at some of the schools. I mean, you're talking about, Moton, I think, was probably the most impacted school on the list.
High Farms.
High Farms group, right? So that went up to like 38. Well, one of the impracticalities of that is elementary school classes aren't built to be a size of 38, and the state's funding formula for facilities actually is predicated on an average class size of 23, not 38, right? Like, that's a big difference.
we did bring this up in debate on this, by the way. We tried to say you should, if you're going to do all this, you should also cap class sizes. You should also have an ideal class size, and they did not want to do that in the blueprint. They basically were saying, I think it was even said in debate on the Senate floor that that class sizes are not considered a measurement of whether of effectiveness or not. And I'm like, I don't know. You talk to any teacher. I don't care whether they're, I don't care who they are. If you have a class, especially at the elementary level, I mean, high class sizes, that's a bad thing.
That's a major disconnect, because not only is class, they're right. I mean, they do believe that affluent schools can have much higher class sizes and still be the same way successful. But at the same time, the governor-elect has a much different view on class size, which is that it should be negotiated. And so you talk about a complete disconnect between these two things.
Well, that might be one of your best allies in this fight, is that if the bargaining units get engaged on this, that would be helpful.
But we also know that when you put a law and you cap a class size, it ties your hands dramatically, depending on what that cap is. Sometimes you need to go over, whether it's high school or whatever, just because of the way that the numbers fall with somebody asking for a class. So when you start legislating a certain cap on a class size, it becomes very difficult.
Oh, I agree. It's not necessarily good policy, but it was just funny to watch them say it doesn't matter how big the classes are.
Well, I think it matters, but there are times when it's the way that you need to do it to run the classes.
But this doesn't even take into account the issues with the planning time, the amount of FTE that we have to add in. I mean, this is just literal, like,
It was-
first
yeah.
components of the blueprint of, it's gonna cost us $11.6 million
Right.
more, based on the stuff that's in there. But as we transition to the 60/40 planning time and all those other things, like, there would be a significant increase in head count or class size in
Yes.
order to comply with that piece of it as well. And that's not even considered in these numbers that you're showing us tonight.
It is not, and so whether, that was just an attempt to reduce it to something to show what it means. And maybe it's as simple as, right now, we are spending $25 million somewhere across this school system, and in a future year, whatever that number becomes that year, but if it were this year, they're saying, no, you're going to spend that $25 million very specifically in these schools. And we would say, but we're spending, but something is, we are spending that 25 million right now on something, and they would say make a local choice. That could be staffing, I guess that could be theoretically a number of things, but this is what we're telling you you will do. And they mean it, like they're pretty clear when they tell us this is what we will do. They're not mincing too many words about that. Somebody asked earlier, the actual number of students taking at least one dual enrollment course is 638. So that's, that's a decent number of our high school students. And then just the wrap-up slide, because someone just touched on it, Mrs. Savigny maybe. Another thing that's not pictured here that's really not part of the blueprint, that's kind of trailing the blueprint, is space. Whether it's for pre-K, whether it's for teacher time, whether it's for having to adjust how you run schools based on restricted funding. The policy of the blueprint got way out in front of space. They are trying to catch up to it next year with the IAC to do a study, which would probably then be 2 years down the road in terms of funding. But we're also not at a place, pre-K would be one of the biggest examples, but I think teacher time shouldn't be lost, other things shouldn't be lost. But we're one of the counties who's not really too close to having the private-public split on what pre-K is supposed to be like. So there's a whole waiver issue there to be working through.
You
for
talked about the
next year.
60/40 split with planning time, and that affects capital too, because you have 60/40 split unless you take a teacher out of the classroom. Where are the kids going to go?
They've
There's
gotta
only
go
so many.
somewhere.
They got to go somewhere. They can't just all go to specials. I mean, now it's based on what's the percentage now that teachers have planning time percentage-wise?
In our secondary schools, we kind of do cover the 60/40 split. It's not so good in the elementary schools. We've done some initial analysis, which is not the final product, but
But there would be a capital cost to that because you're going to need more classrooms unless you put the
Yeah.
teacher out of the classroom.
Ernesto Diaz is our HR director. We've done some initial analyses that would suggest we might need around 100 to 125 FTE, mostly at the elementary level, to get to the 60/40 split. So are there 125 teachers to be hired in a given,
No.
in a timeline? But if we do hire them, where do we put them? So are all of the teachers going to be on carts?
The utilization rate on the capital side, I don't know if it's 85 or 90% at elementary school. Your utilization rate for your school is going to have to go way down, which means you're going to need way more actual physical classrooms unless your teachers go and we build them offices somewhere. I mean, all these decisions may mean lots of other things. I don't know that they thoroughly think of all those things.
I would say not. So our goal tonight was to sort of lay a foundation to kind of bring the restricted nature in. Didn't mean to sound like we were complaining so much about it. At the moment, it is what it is, but, hopefully this helped a little bit, and I think we'll.
I was waiting for you to give us the solution here at the end. That's why I sat through all this.
I was pretty good with the Thornton formula.
Is there anything in the blueprint that is a positive, like, I know more money's coming in, but is there anything in here that you believe will positively impact Carroll County Public Schools over what we're doing today? New ideas that came out?
I mean, philosophically, many of these things aren't bad ideas, but practically how they can be implemented is the challenge.
That's right. The career ladder sounds pretty fascinating and exciting for professional development of staff members, but, how it's going to be put in operation will be the question.
Can I just say, unfortunately, I have to run. I have a meeting at 6 back in Baltimore County. But it would be helpful, I think, to all the legislators if the professionals would sit down and come up with a couple of ideas of how you think Kerwin could be tweaked in order to make things better for Carroll County. And then we can take that and take a look at it, and then we can put that into legislation, put some of them, the ones that look like they're most doable, into legislation and try to get it passed.
We can do that.
We'll work on that.
And as long as it doesn't hurt the other jurisdictions, that's the problem. You just want to make sure no one else is a loser. But if we have the accountability and we get the flexibility to have that accountability and no one else is hurt by it, I mean, there's got to.
Flexibility, yeah, if there's a way to do flexibility, that doesn't mean we get more money than we were supposed to get or something. That's the third rail down there in Annapolis, is it can't mess with anybody else's money. Yeah. So, I mean, but definitely, I mean, we definitely want to work with you.
Can you put it into like a rural county approach or a grouping approach? Because
We definitely should find partners. I think the problem is, I look at the numbers, is that there's several rural counties that get some extra money because
they do. Oh, I know. No, the ones that are in the pool with us is Howard and Cecil and Hartford. So it's going to be very difficult to partner with them on that. But if there's any way you can look at ruralness.
We definitely have to find partnerships with other counties that need
possibly
something similar.
Frederick.
Yeah.
But yeah, the ones I was looking at were pretty affluent that, they're not going to.
Well, I don't think they consider us rural either. We're more suburban. I mean, rural is.
No, okay, so with that said, suburban counties. And where I'm going is not necessarily rural or suburban, just anybody that we can, like you said, match up with and really.
Many years ago, Delegate Krebs,
yeah.
Delegate Rose and Delegate, we worked together with Baltimore City
Yeah.
on something, and it was actually like a great thing that
It was
we both
declining
needed.
enrollment.
Okay.
It was declining enrollment. So that's when you have, if you can find
Yeah.
something with some common cause, particularly, frankly, not to be political, but with a bluer county even,
Yeah.
sometimes
Yeah.
that matters too.
Because
That can
actually,
be-
our most poor counties are actually our rural counties. Somerset,
Right,
Caroline,
right.
Allegheny, they're actually poorer than Baltimore.
Yeah.
So,
No, I get you. It's just the numbers that you threw out there. If you look at the pools, you got the Howard, Anne Arundel, Cecil, Hartford, Carroll. I'm like, well, wait a second. That's going to be tough. But if you can match somehow and go after legislation that way.
I think the key for us, at least in the short term, that would help us would be more flexibility in the way we're spending the money we're getting. So, more
Almost like a waiver on some of the
Yes.
restrictions.
Yes.
Right.
unless we tried to do
Absolutely.
that years ago with all-day kindergarten, and literally say, we want to meet the criteria. We want kids ready for first grade. So hold us accountable for this and let us have the flexibility to do it. And we were very close to getting that to happen years ago, and Chuck Eckert pushed us to do that. The only problem was, other counties pretty much said to us, hey, if you can do it that way, our county's going to wonder why we can't. And it's like, that's a stupid reason not to pass something. But again, if we can be successful with the flexibility, why should we not? That's what it's all about. We need to keep saying that. Everywhere we go, it's about student achievement. It's about how our students are doing.
And just to add on to that, just from my experience, military experience, rules and regulations are made for waivers and exceptions. So if we can look at legislation that identifies regulatory guidelines where you can put in there, I don't want to say waivers, but, if it meets these type of criteria, A, B, and C, these funds can be used for this over here and not its initial intention. So you have an intention of 1, 2, and 3, and you're kind of making that Chinese menu approach. But, it should be regulatory guidelines to have those. Again, waivers could be used, but other ways to using the funds. So,
Yep.
yeah, I think it's a
And
great
I
idea.
don't know, this has been great, and like I said at the beginning, I'm so glad everybody made time for this. But I think what our side needs to know too is
Which side?
Yeah, I was just
what
going to say.
what committees you guys get on. Is
Which
there
side are
some-
you on right
You know, we've all got everybody's email now. Is there some way to partner more? Like you and I have been talking, like if we wanted certain people to come up and visit here, maybe we ask one of you guys who have a bigger network than us, but I'm not sure we know who has which network. I don't know how to foster more communication
Well,
on
right
this.
now,
We've been fighting, and I'll be on the other
Delegate
side
Rose
of the
sits on the
fence, to
Education
meet
Committee.
quarterly with commissioners, but we're all busy. You know, how do we communicate all that back and forth?
That's what she says, well, and having a presence and having, we have a new administration coming in, we all need to reach out, it's gonna be all new people, mostly new people, and reaching out and having a dialogue with those folks, inviting them up to see something in the interim once they're in place, to see how we're doing. A picture's worth I tell them all, a picture's worth 1,000 words, and just having a dialogue with those people making the decisions, whether it's the AIB board, I don't even know who's on it, the account, I'm sorry, Josh, for all the acronyms. One thing I've learned from Senator Kagan is she doesn't allow any acronyms, and when I'm in a meeting with her, because people don't know, it takes you a minute. The AIB board is the Accountability Implementation Board. And then once you say it, so it's about accountability. It's a state-level board. It's brand new. I don't even know who sits on it. I don't know what their criteria is. It's a work in progress.
And that is something that we've already talked about that needs to be revisited as well, because there are no rural counties represented on that board at all, to include actually Prince George's County. They left them off of there as well. And so we're hoping to revisit that and address the fact that Prince George is one of our bigger jurisdictions, doesn't have anyone, and nobody from the rural areas are represented. So we think that's something that maybe we can work in a bipartisan way to change. So we're hoping.
But, December 15th, we're having a gathering of all the elected officials and key partners, over at Exploration Commons. Kenny, your point is very well taken, and you and I talk about it a lot. We got to continue to communicate, and we will. There's no magic to this, and there's no silver bullet. The key is open communications, and then you can start learning who's who in the zoo and kind of pulling the threads. But it starts at December 15th when we'll get together and break bread, and there'll be wine and beer there because of Exploration Commons. Just saying.
Got a liquor license for that?
Yeah, he's already bribing me with beer. Nobody here did that.
Yeah, we're definitely going to have to keep the lines of communication open between all three groups. So the Board of Ed, the Board of Commissioners, and the local delegation. I mean, this is going to be an all hands on deck trying to figure out how to do this over the next 2
Well,
years.
you're preaching to the choir, I think, with this group. I think I can speak for even the new people coming in. The problem's going to be, once we understand the issues and put forth the solution, is how do you get the other folks to buy into it and to see it's not going to affect their jurisdictions or could help them with partners. So our biggest obstacle, once we come up with some possibilities, is getting it passed with
Right.
23 other jurisdictions worth of representatives.
Right. I mean, if we can find some other partners that we might work well together. I mean, if you talked about we're the third least diverse jurisdiction, and that kind of hurts us. So Garrett and Allegheny might be others to get a good perspective from them. And if you look at the wealth equalization portion, there's most of the counties, they're on about the same plane of their average wealth per pupil and how much funding they get from the state. But there are a couple that are way out of whack, us being one of them, right? Like we're 10th, but we're dead last in amount of funding that we get. There are two other counties that kind of fall under that scenario. Like most of them are kind of about the same place on that grid, but it's us and I made a note of it, Calvert and St. Mary's that have the most disparity. So they might be able to provide a similar perspective.
And also, I mean, through MABE and through FASAM, MABE is the Maryland Association of Boards of Education. That's the group that the boards go to. And then FASAM is the Superintendent's Association. So through those groups as well, if you're having those conversations, it's coming from all, everyone's having the same dialogue about solutions, and then maybe you can all agree on something. And then we can all be on the same page. But even at your level, John, I don't know what your group is you meet with, but, I mean, there's other organizations, and again, MABE.
Yeah, MABE is
And I know
definitely.
something else you've mentioned before. I think, don't yell at me, I think of you guys, you start early January. But we probably need to have these kind of meetings 2 months ago, because you're working all year round, you're writing stuff for bills, and you're planning ahead. This is almost, hopefully not too late, but this is very late in the timing. You guys are all getting ready to do orientation and get started, and
Yeah, the election obviously
busy.
changed the timeline. We should certainly.
Exactly.
We've done some fall meetings before, and I think we always should. Yeah.
And there's a new administration coming in. I'm telling you, every 8 years or 4 years with a whole new administration, it's a whole new world for everybody. But what was I going to say? Oh, keep in mind too, for you guys, this is the only issue you have, education, which is huge. we go down there and like, this is like one little piece of all the things we have to do. So having the time and doing it ahead of time gives us more time to focus, because right now, we just met with the hospital this morning, and they got all these issues. And depending on what committee you're on, that's what your focus is. So, you know, this is one little piece of 1,000 issues that we have in front of us, and it's a very important piece of it. Same with the commissioners, they've got other issues as well. So the more we have time to devote to it, and a time when you can spend time focusing on it, it's not the only thing we have to think about. They have to, I keep saying we, they, I don't have to think about any of this.
I know we've always appreciated too when you guys have legislative night down in Annapolis, you know, when we attend to those, and we get to have conversations with you. Those always help as well, because that helps. That helps, you know, hey, this is kind of like what has been going on. You know, even the emailing, having the ability to email you at any time when there's issues. I mean, I know that's something I've always appreciated.
And I would certainly welcome an invitation to the legislative nights.
Are you on our email list? We've got, every elected
Yeah.
official should be on our email list. Everyone gets it every year.
I've not gotten any invitation to your legislative nights.
We haven't had it in 3 years.
Well,
No, it's basically.
I've been around for 4.
We call it District 5 night. And we invite every mayor gets invited, every board of ed, every elected official in
No,
Carroll
I have
County.
not gotten any invitation.
District 5 night, have to find out.
We'd be sure if it gets invited,
Yeah.
let's put it that way.
We will absolutely be sure of that.
Thank
Mr.
you.
O'Neill, maybe you can answer. I'm curious if something like this blueprint of this magnitude has been executed in another state, and if so, can we learn from it, or is the state of Maryland completely pioneering this, and we're going out into the wilderness?
Delegate, do you want to answer?
I don't want to be the Donner Party.
I don't think that there is an exact apples to apples comparison. I believe, if I remember correctly, they were using Massachusetts.
That's correct.
New Jersey,
Yeah.
also foreign countries, Germany, and what's the one you always like to say?
Singapore.
Norway. Like, this is a mishmash of a lot of things. And it's not to say that there aren't a lot of good things, good intentions and ideas in it. But what our discussions had been all along. Singapore.
That's right, it's Singapore, that's right.
Was, we were always conscious of the fact that, of the funding, because we were very sensitive to the funding issues all along, and the implementation and the flexibility. And what you have very correctly said is, this product, they're all in. Like, there's no going backwards, really. So I think what, as you mentioned, and what Sue mentioned, if we can get some practical paths forward of fixes, changes, ways that we can make this work in a way that, you know, that can somehow make sense. I don't know what that answer is. I think that's really what we have to do moving forward. But there's no apples to apples to it. It was, how many years did we discuss this? 3, 4?
3 years.
3 years of briefings and meetings and changes and again, the last thing I'll say is, after a meeting I had the other night, and hearing from people in our caucus who are on the Appropriations Committee, we are not alone in our concerns with the restrictiveness, with the penalties. I don't know if they're calling them penalties, but basically they are. We're not by ourselves. And so the general consensus I took from that meeting is that there are going to be discussions, and there's going to be tweaks, and there's going to be changes, because it's really almost impossible, which you very clearly demonstrated tonight. It's going to be impossible to implement this in the time frame that they set up. That's just my take from it. So I think having the discussions and trying to find ways, and it may take more than, one session. It may be that we fix a couple things, how that can be, you push here and then it pulls here.
Right.
And then you might have to make some changes. But we certainly want to be your partner in trying to figure out something.
Some of you guys that have seen Thornton, I don't know if there's any learning from that. To me, watching this, Kerwin, and I said it all along, they know more about education than I'll ever learn. I hope they have good financial advisors, because they don't know anything about money. and they don't care how it gets implemented.
Yeah.
And now that's all dumped on these people. And I don't know if Thornton was the same way, and then the next year bills got passed that modified stuff, or it just, you were stuck with it and that's how it went.
And John, you say there's not a lot of regulation and direction, and I know there's a lot of changes at MSDE, but do you think that's purposeful to give you flexibility? And should we take it that way and just say, hey?
I don't think it's purposeful in a bad way or a sinister way. I think it's a lot of new people. There have been issues with getting the budget cleared for the AIB to staff. They weren't fully staffed. They're still not fully staffed. New state superintendent, lots of new folks came with him.
But maybe we don't want
Yeah.
more restrictions. I know we're asking it to be guidance, but that guidance could end up being even more restrictive.
It's overwhelming. Like the amount of time that a lot of people in this room and not in this room spend on this is overwhelming. And respectfully, it's overwhelming to those folks at the state level too. They're running these meetings, and there's, Cindy's seen it. There's like a PASAM spreadsheet that has 600 pages of questions from locals. And maybe it's a lot. I don't know. And they've answered maybe a quarter of them, or maybe not even that. So they're trying. I wouldn't say that they're not trying. They're feeling it out. They're.
But what's the odds you're going to get minimal guidance, and what's the history of doing this, and you're going to submit, and then somebody's going to say, oops, that's wrong.
So I think the real guidance is finally going to come with the submission of the local implementation plans and the feedback we get from that into the summer, which is why I would hope that there would be some just built-in flexibility over, we're not going to punish you yet, or we're going to tell you through the feedback process, you need to rethink some of these things.
Who's going to review those? Is it AIB, or is it going to be the state MSDE? I mean, who is actually, the other thing that we oppose, all of us that are here, is having these two different boards. You got Maryland State Department of Education, the State Board of Education, and then you got this accountability board, and they both sort of are doing the same thing, supposedly.
So there's some
Very bizarre.
There's some
Very
growing
bizarre.
pains there, which I think you would anticipate. Ultimately, the AIB approves the plans and releases the funds, or doesn't release the funds. But MSDE is, there's clear partnerships
So
there.
MSD is conducting the calls with you, right? That's who you're
Well,
on.
both.
when you s-
Rachel's on almost all of those calls, even at like the CFO level or at this, at some other policy level. And she has a couple staff members now. So I think that MSDE is trying to provide technical assistance for developing the plan, but they are doing that in concert with the AIB. It's a lot. I don't know how else to say it. It's a lot, and that is different from Thornton. So Thornton didn't have, in my mind, my memory, my opinion, Thornton didn't have no accountability. We each had, every local had to develop the Bridge to Excellence master plan that sort of accounted for how you were spending the money, because you had local choice in how to spend the money. And there was a certain trigger date, and Delegate Krebs, you might remember better than me. There was a certain trigger date where Dr. Grasmick, who at that time was the state superintendent, had to conduct a performance audit of the whole program statewide, and that went to the General Assembly with, as I remember, rave reviews. I remember we all stood in Ways and Means and clapped for her. So there was accountability, but there wasn't restricted funding there. If this funding wasn't restricted, I would be wearing a Blueprint T-shirt and running around.
That's our goal.
A couple things. One, Kenny, I did catch you saying, hand it off to these guys like you've already left, but you're still here. And so maybe it will take a sailor to take over, and, just saying. But the priorities are going to be very important. So what you're being asked for, and what Senator West asked about the, 2, 3, these are the top issues, is going to really help us on the board as well. Because what, Delegate Krebs said about priorities, this is your priority, then it becomes our priorities, then it becomes state delegation priorities. And nobody's subordinate to anybody. We are all here, as elected officials in these pools to allow us to get what needs to be done here. That's going to be really critical. And Tara, your comments about connectivity, informal connectivity, emails, texts, phone calls. I've spent hours on the phone with one delegate just saying, with all the love, but,
Constructive, positive.
No idea who that was.
but you know, it's so well worth it. And, yeah, I don't mind formal gatherings like this. They're very important, especially for the community to capture, because that's what this does. This allows the community to capture the dialogue that we're having. But the real work is the texting back and forth, because again, it goes like this across. It doesn't go up here or down here. And this attitude, like it could, no, it may be different priorities, but it's always equal. So, yeah.
And I don't think we need to decide, we've talked about quarterly meetings, and Don and I were talking about this morning. Can we get to a place, whichever side I'm on, three of us can't do anything. Two could meet too. Sure. And have some mini meetings.
Right.
And
A subcommittee.
yeah, and again, you guys, when I was in Annapolis for MABE, I went to Starbucks and drove back to York. Now I'm going to come crash in your guys' offices and bug you,
Well,
because
you can have
everybody's.
all of them, because they can't build a quorum. All of them cannot.
So, and that'll be communication, you know?
I was going to say, I mean, yeah, definitely, come down to Annapolis for the day to sit there and talk to you about everything that's happening. Individually, can't speak for the entire board, but I think that's something that, bring a list and be like, all right, this is where we're sitting at. I think that's definitely a good
And
thing
you
to
guys
do.
do a lot of staff-to-staff
Oh, yeah.
stuff all the time.
And we do when we go down to Mako, we take the time, or I was taking the time, to go meet with folks, and talk about the issues, whether it was health issues or the Veterans Center or whatever. No, absolutely. Take advantage of those times. So.
And I just want to say, I do appreciate, I've had very open communication with most of you already, and even Mr. O'Neill over the years, a bill about something, I am not the expert. And you've always been so very responsive, just to shoot a quick email and say, I don't understand this, does this make sense, whatever. So that's always been good, and I think that we'll just continue to.
Keep in mind, the last 3 years have been the most unusual years of anyone's life.
That's true.
And as soon as Kerwin was passed is when we went into the pandemic. So everything is sort of delayed, and there's something to be said for in-person everything. And our committee never still met this year in person. We sat in our offices on a computer. So you don't have those side conversations. And I think that was a huge lack of ability to have a conversation with committee members or whatever about these kind of issues out of a formal context, because we were still not in person. Did you ever go in person in your committee?
Did at the very end.
We did not go. I'm the health committee. People wore masks at their desks on their computer. But my point is, I think the lack of having those kind of conversations in the hallways with our colleagues really hurt many issues for the last couple of years, and we should be back to some sense of normalcy this year. And it really does make a difference.
It does. That's what we were seeing at MABE this year. It was a conference, and we had representatives from all of the local boards.
Yep.
And certainly Blueprint was on all of our minds, and we had a lot of sessions and side conversations concerning it. Didn't come up with any solutions or answers, but, we were,
No silver bullet, but you're
right. We were certainly hearing each other's thoughts and comments concerning it.
Well, hopefully, this board is a firm believer in person as much as possible.
Yes. I think I heard that.
We're a firm believer in local control, which we are too, and getting results. And you guys do a very good job, and we always praise, and people down there praise Carroll County all the time. That's why I don't want to have our hands tied, because like they'll say, Carroll County's the model, Carroll County's, okay, well, let us be the model.
Right. And we can't lose your earlier point, Susan, about this is supposed to be about student achievement, right? And so we just have to always keep that in our minds. And as we're pushing back or asking for guidance from the state, maybe we need to stop asking for guidance and start providing what we think is the appropriate guidance for some of these situations, saying this is all about student achievement, and this is how we improve student achievement. This is the guidance that we're going to be providing to say this is how we're going to be doing it, because we're one of the best counties from a student achievement perspective, and we think this is a better way to do it.
Yes, I agree with you.
The three of us newbies, we're going on a cross-state bus trip for 3 days. While we're on that bus trip,
With their other new colleagues.
yes,
not
with
just the three
our
of them.
new
Yeah.
colleagues. While we're doing that, we'll figure out all the answers.
Senator Reedy promised you guys were going to fix this. I heard him.
It's actually just the three of us going across the state.
It's not just the three of them there.
Well, Mr. O'Neill, you always do a wonderful job. I feel like when we have these meetings, you're the running back. You got to carry the ball, so thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
And thank you for your support and being here and just, listening to what our challenges are at this point. And I think that's one thing that, Carroll County, we've always had going for us is a close relationship, between our board, our commissioners, and our delegates. So thank you again. And as Mr. Kyler closes, just remember we have refreshments in the back if anyone would like to stick around.
Dinner?
I thought you were closing. Okay. Thank you, everyone, and we have refreshments in the back.
Hey, Commissioner Boucher works for food.